After the meeting, and is recording a channel conversation or on Microsoft Stream. Got it. Okay, so everyone should get the recording message. So
yeah, we have. Thank you.
So that's the basically the document I shared in the Teams chat. You should be able to see that in the channel, in the file section at the top. You should have access to this document. So just a bit of introduction and a bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get started. So I'm Leandro. I'm the technical manager in HIC. I've been a developer on the RDMP for a while, on and off. From HIC, we also have Chris Hall, which is the DLS, the data team lead and governance manager in his spare time. Which is going to drive you through the software, and then there will be other people joining in to provide support if needed. You know, the more we are, the better we can monitor the room. And then when they come in, I'll just introduce them. So in terms of housekeeping, Teams I think is going to be our main source for communication and support. So just ping a message in the channel, mention myself or Chris or Magali or the whole channel, and we'll try and provide help. We can do, you know, one-to-one, face-to-face calls. That's going to be easy, and most of the problems will probably be easy to solve through that. So you know, you can get back to what you were trying to do. We do have a Confluence page, which should be public and accessible. And I don't know if you tried to go to that. It's not going. There it is going. It was a full screen, sorry. And we are populating that as we go. So at the moment, there is an introduction and a bit of a glossary and some quick step-by-step guides to performance and features. Everything will be clear once we start having a look at the software. Least but not last, there is an email which we use for support. So if you don't get any reply on any other channel, just fire an email to hicbusiness-support@dundee.ac.uk, and Adrian Cloudworthy and his team will be happy to reply. In terms of these meetings, and well, we'll see how the tech holds with so many participants. I'll be monitoring the chat, and in Teams you also have this new option of raising your hand. I don't know if you saw that new thing in Teams. So if you don't want to interrupt the person speaking, just raise that one, raise your hand. I'll keep monitoring the chat, and we'll go back to you when you know, when we open up for questions. And that's it. I'll be recording the meeting. As usual, let's try everyone to keep the mic on mute to avoid any background noise. And I do have a small poll bot that I may use every now and then just to fire questions in the chat, just to make sure that some of the concepts are clear. So you'll see that when it happens, and I'll point your attention to that. And that's all I wanted to say. If there are no other questions, I'll just hand it over to Chris, and we can go over RDMP, have a look at the UI, have a look at the tool, have a look at what the main features are from the point of view of mainly core building and extractions. And then we can go and support anyone that has problems installing it and setting it up. Does that sound as well, Caddy?
I have a quick question. Sorry. When you say the documents are on the File tab in Teams, I can only see the General tab, so I don't see any files. Am I looking in the wrong place? Is it on the General channel?
In the general channel at the top, there should be Posts, File, and PLC Notebook.
Okay, bear with me 2 seconds because I'm using 2 machines.
Sorry, I don't seem to be part of the team on Teams.
It's the Dundee one, Vicky.
I've got something coming up saying meeting is only available to team members.
Yeah, no, it's the Dundee set of teams, and you won't be able to switch to it.
Okay.
So we can go through that. Okay, no, I can see it now. Sorry, I was just looking in the wrong place. Too many teams.
Yeah, no worries. So Vicky, I got your email is vicky.marrow@abdn.ac.uk. Is that the one you're using for this as well?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, that's the one I'm using.
Okay. Okay, so you should be able to see the channel and see the list of people and see the image that Christopher as Chris has just posted.
I'll have a look.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, although I can't see the chat because it's only available to team members, and I've joined as the university account rather than the Dundee guest account. So would it be easier if some of us went and joined as the Dundee guest account?
Probably, yeah, because that's why I could see, I could see in the chat there are others invited. There is Vicky and Katie, Joanne and Barry, because you probably joined from another account rather than the guest one.
Okay.
Is it a case of if you're using Teams regularly for your own purposes, if you use the same email address, you should get a little drop down at the top right that allows you to switch between different teams?
Yeah.
And providing you're in the University of Dundee one, then it should work, I think.
Yeah, but I haven't switched, if that makes sense. I've joined as if I was from the University of Aberdeen rather than University of Dundee, but I can't switch when I'm on a call. So
yeah, if you switch, it'll drop you off the call. But Leandro, is this call just in the chat channel? So if Katie was to switch, she can just hit the join.
Yeah, I think there'll be a few of us that need to switch by the looks of it. So Barry, Yarrick, Joanne, AD, Vicky, and Arthur. Okay, all right, I'll go switch. 2 seconds. I will see you on the other side.
We'll try that as well.
As I also noticed, it's slightly annoying. You can't see both the participants and the conversation. So, Leandro, be aware that if someone raises their hand, unless you get the little pop-up, you can't see that they're continuously sitting with a hand up, right?
Yeah, well, luckily I got the... Stop sharing my screen now.
Actually, can you double click and pull the chat out? Does that work? I can chuck it on another monitor. So yeah, I think I can maybe do that. I don't know. Can't find the chat.
No, because it's not chat, it's the channel.
Oh, it's the meeting channel. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, but we got everyone. Kathy is back. Vicky and Joanne, I think they just left, and they'll be back in a second. That's Vicky. Welcome back.
I did it. I shouldn't be this proud.
And Joanne, she's lost in the interweb.
Whilst we're still obviously setting up, Leandro, do you think it's worth discussing the kind of platform database bit as well, or should I just dive into the mature?
Yeah, let's start with that concept, you know, how the architecture works. And that would be helpful. We don't have a
I'll start off with my test instance then, and just talk about that briefly.
yeah, okay.
Also, my dining room is absolutely freezing this morning.
Yeah, it's quite cold.
We've got a hopper here, so I can't see anything outside. I'm just surrounded by mist. That's a little bit strange. Wait,
Same
I have
here.
messaged Joanne. I've lost Arta's back in, so give me 2 seconds. I'll just give Joanne a call and check that she's okay. So Teams has run into an issue for Joanne. So if you want to start, I'll give Joanne a call and just work out what's going on.
Well, we'll share the recording anyway. Okay, Chris, do you want to put the show on the road then?
Yeah, sure, let's do that.
Cool, let's do that.
Okay.
I'll shut up.
So hopefully everyone can see that. And of course, typical Teams, I can't see you because I'm looking at that. Yeah, as Leandro said, raise your hand, and hopefully Leandro will shout at me to get me to stop talking, because I've obviously got this situation where I can't see both you guys and what I'm presenting. So this is all going to be a little bit interesting. As you said, I'm going to start with the kind of platform databases, which is probably the state that most of you are at with regard to RDMP at the moment. So currently I'm looking at our synthetic data test environment just for that purpose. But I'll shift on to our current use, the instance that we're using on our NHS network for our kind of business as usual day-to-day work in my team. So when you load RDMP at the moment, what you're faced with is a little kind of loading window, which I can't replicate because I've got connections set up here. But basically what happens is when you click the button that says set platform databases, you get this window that pops up. There's two options here. You can either create platform databases or you can connect to an existing RDMP platform database. Basically what it's looking for is a connection to two databases, which you will see if I click on this, or our organization already has RDMP databases. So these connection strings, don't worry about these in particular because these are specific to my machine, but once we have an idea of how your configuration is going to work, we'll be able to help you through this. But basically there's two elements that you need that need to be set up first with RDMP. There's the catalog, which is the database that holds everything from the metadata to the kind of pointers that tell us where the different components are stored in your database server, and data export manager, which is more things that are related to actual exports. So it's two separate concepts. Once you've set them up once, you don't really have to worry about them again. But just to kind of give you a bit of background and explain what's going on there. If first time round, if you're working on local machine and you're going to be using that's the wrong button, that's always a good start. If you're working on what am I doing? Here we go. Right. If you're working on a local machine and you're going to be setting up a local instance of RDMP for you to mess around with, and you have a SQL Server set up on your local machine or whatever, you can use the create new platform database option. What it's going to do there is it's going to ask you to connect to a server, so name of a server, username and password if you're using a SQL username and password, or nothing at all if you're using integrated security, which mostly we tend to be, and I suspect you probably will be as well, and a little prefix for the databases. What you can also do here is tick this box that says example data sets, and what that will do is it will generate some synthetic data and set up some kind of pre-canned stuff in RDMP, which gives you actually the kind of setup that I'm running here in the background for synthetic data. These three options here basically just change the way that that data is generated. So the seed is the kind of random seed for how it generates stuff. Person count is the number of people that it will generate, and what it will do is it generates data with something that looks like a chi number, and it will generate it in such a way that those chi's appear in multiple data sets, so you can do linkage, obviously. And then row count is a per data set thing. If you create using those options, what it will give you, if I can flip across to SQL Server, no, that's the wrong box. That's always a good start. Where's my box? Where's my laptop going? My taskbar. I'm viewing the taskbar from one machine and RDMP from another machine. It's always good live demo stuff. Okay, so what the example data that it creates goes into this RDMP example data database. So I'm now looking at SQL Server. So you can see, for example, it creates some fake biochemistry data with something that looks like a chi but isn't, and some stuff that you would expect: serum, sample types, dates, test codes, some results, all that kind of stuff. And it does the same for biochemistry, demography, which gives things like SIMD and kind of approximate postcode, stuff like that. Prescribing, obviously, and hospital admissions obviously contain what you would expect them to contain. And randomly, carotid artery scan for some reason. But yeah, some data that you can then play with in that test environment. So that's probably, I think, that might be what we use for a bit of this training. But as I say, today we're going to concentrate on our own mature instance.
Chris, I got a question from Arthur.
Yeah, just a simple one, because is there any chance you can actually use linked servers to access different databases? Because our data is not going to be sitting just on one server.
Okay, so the databases, the connection strings that you're setting up there are all about the RDMP databases. So you see here on the back on the screen, the RDMP catalog was one of the connection strings we were setting, and the data export was the other one. This is the kind of data that's stored in these databases is what drives RDMP. So I don't want to dwell into this too much because the chances are you'll never have to look at this kind of stuff. But I'm also going to go in the wrong place because I can't remember how it's all laid out. But in here is you can configure different servers on RDMP and have data on different database servers as well. So this is only for driving RDMP. It's not necessarily for the data that you're going to be using. The example data that it produces, obviously sitting on the same server, is kind of a thing of convenience more than anything, to be honest. Because obviously when you're setting up initially and you want to try this kind of test environment, chances are you might well only have a single instance. There's a little bit more complication, and Leandro, please note down cross-server for future discussion, one of the future sessions. There's a little bit of kind of complication in doing cross-server stuff, but we can explain that as we go through. And it depends what's sitting where. So if all of your data is sitting on a second server, that's not really going to be a problem. If your data is set across multiple servers, then it's not really a problem either. It's just that some of the configuration has to go slightly differently, and some of the ways that you use RDMP, I think, changes slightly. We do a little bit of cross-server stuff, but not actually all that much. Most of our stuff sits on a single database server within HIC. We do run two database servers for slightly different purposes, and we do occasionally run extractions from both. So it's definitely capable of doing that, and it's something that it's designed to do. And as I say, we can talk about that at a later stage.
Yeah, so the main point is that it's able to do multiple cross-server extraction as well and linkage. If the server technology is the same for all your server, then that's definitely supported. The problem is if you have like some data sets in MySQL, some data sets in SQL Server, some data sets in Oracle, then at that point, I'm not entirely sure it's fully featured to go across all of that.
Okay, so that's the, I've lost my taskbar again. That's the kind of platform database bit, and then the generation. And I guess if you're sitting with a machine that has an MS SQL Server set up and you pull it down from GitHub, that's the way you can get up and running very quickly. And as I say, that will give you that will give you an RDMP instance that has a number of different things set up. Again, you see from the database, so if you remember a moment ago when I showed you the sample data, we had hospital admissions, we had demography, biochemistry, etc. So this is the synthetic data setup. And then the way you want to interact, well, the easiest way to interact with RDMP is to use this little ribbon at the top here that gives you the different options. And you can see again in the synthetic one, I'm pretty sure this is, I think I've made a couple of very small changes in terms of additions, but there's not much I've added. I think Cohort Builder comes with a couple of examples that you can see, and I think Data Export comes with an example project. So it's all kind of, there's already in that sample setup, there's already some pre-canned stuff that you can look at once you've inserted it. It's not just generating the synthetic data, it's also generating a couple of kind of working models that you can look at. Okay, so that's I've concentrated a little bit on the synthetic data version. I'm going to move into our mature instance and talk a little bit about, I guess, how we use RDMP. I think most, if not all of you, have seen RDMP at some point anyway, so I'll try to kind of...
Chris, just a sec, because that's something I wanted to ask. I mean, do we need to take a step back and explain, where RDMP is coming from? What are the various concepts within RDMP, or has anyone, as Chris said, pretty much seen RDMP in action and knows what the purpose of all this is?
If I'm honest, this is my absolute first encounter with it, but hold up.
Same here.
You guys moving on.
I might be better in that case. So Leandro, I don't know what you think, but maybe better in that case sticking with the synthetic one because there's less stuff to at least to confuse everyone. What do you think?
There's definitely less noise,
and it would also be potentially something they'll be more familiar with if they end up using the synthetic version for training as well.
Yeah. But
Okay.
maybe take a step back and
and let's do that.
The concepts and what.
Okay, so I guess this is RDMP. I think when you open, does it come up with a home screen when you open first time? I can't remember. It's been a while.
I think so. Yeah.
I think once you set up database connections, I think this is what you will see. I think look at this. This is what you will see when you open RDMP. Obviously, there's a recent box, so these are going to be populated based upon work that you've been doing, and this is a way that we can interact with RDMP. So you see that we've kind of segregate the application based upon the functionality. So we've got catalog. I'll continue to use the word catalog because that's what RDMP call it, but in RDMP, a catalog is essentially an abstract concept of a data set. So that might be configured behind the scenes as a single database table. It might be a join between multiple tables. It might be a view in a database, something like that. But from the perspective of what you need to know, it's a data set. So the various catalogs consisted a series of different things, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We've obviously got Cohort Builder, which is hopefully quite clear on what that's doing. That allows us to build configurations that can allow us to piece together cohorts using the catalogs that are available to us. Projects are all about extraction, and they also tie things together. So we can tie together a Cohort Builder configuration. We can have custom catalogs that are specific to that individual project. And a number of different extractions that perhaps look at different data sets or have different filters based on them or whatever. And data load is obviously about getting the data into the database in the first place. And this might be something that you're doing on routine. So you might know that you're getting data being refreshed on a weekly basis or whatever. You can set up a configuration and run that, and it will take the data and push it into the database. So that's the kind of basics of what it can do. And what I'll do is I'll drill down a little bit into each of these concepts as we go through. So this will be familiar for some of you, a bit of a refresher, and it will be new for others. So as I've said, stick up hands, interrupt, ask questions as you go along, and I'll kind of change and tailor the session as we're going through based on what we think you need. So from here, there's obviously a new button and an open button as well. So the new button is allowing you to create new catalogs. We can create them from one of two things. We could make them from a file of some description or from a table already exists in a database. I'm not going to dwell on that too much at the moment because I want to talk more about what a catalog is and how it kind of manifests. So the way there's a number of ways you can navigate through RDMP, but I tend to use this little ribbon across the top, and I'll probably use the word ribbon. If I talk about ribbon, I'm talking about this thing here. So what we'll do is we'll click on the catalogs ribbon, and you'll see I get this nice left pane opening up, which contains all the catalogs that are in my current instance. So again, I'm using the synthetic data that's been generated. So this is what would happen if you were to use that. This is where you would have a series of catalogs for whatever it is that you happen to be using in your own data warehouse environment. So let's take prescribing as the example. We'll all have a rough idea what prescribing is, hopefully. And if I expand that, you can see that in here we've got a couple of different concepts. We've got aggregate graphs and catalog items. I'm going to concentrate on the latter at the moment, catalog items. And what I'm going to say is, again, it's an abstract concept of kind of like a column in a database. So if I expand these catalog items, you'll see things that hopefully start to make some sense within the concept of prescribing. So we've got a CHI number, there's obviously the identifier. You've got the approved name for the drug or a BNF code for the drug. There's also things like quantity and strength, and there's a date column as well. So you can sort of see what these things are. So each of these things is a catalog item. And if I expand upon this catalog item, you can see there's two elements here as well. This top element is quite simply a pointer to the database, the location in the database where it's stored. So it's not something you really need to worry about, but you can, if you need to get back to the database to see what's going on, you can see this is the CHI column in the prescribing table in the RDMP example data database. So again, it's there, it's showing you, but there's not really much you need to know about that. You just know that's the allocation that's been linked. We now have this little bit here with this green arrow. This green arrow is indicating that this is an extraction, this is an extractable column. And if I double click on this, you'll see again the right pane changes, and this gives us a little bit more information. What we have here, the large box is basically showing us the SQL, the SQL code that's happening, and this is obviously stuff that's pre-canned on the import, and we don't have to get too involved with this. And this is done in the setup stage of RDMP. Once you start using RDMP, this isn't something that you're necessarily going to go back and mess around with. It's more of a kind of set it up once and then leave it behind. The key thing I'm going to point out are these little options across here. So we've got primary key. That's important if you ever want to start extracting to a database, and you want that database to be updatable in future, because of course primary keys are important in knowing if the record's been updated or whatever else, if it's in a newly inserted record. Actually, if you're doing flat file extraction, CSV extractions, it makes no difference at all. Is extraction identifier is a very important checkbox, however. That's what tells RDMP how to link different catalogs together. So in our case, of course, CHI is the hub of our kind of spine of data sets, and they're all linked together using the CHI column. So when we import it, we set it to be an extraction identifier. There's a nice workflow for importing data that we'll cover in a later session. And you see that this is one of the things that's asked during that workflow. So if you're importing data, you basically need to say that you want to link it based upon something, and that's something we refer to as an extraction identifier. In this case, it's CHI. We've got another option here to hash on data release. That's about one of the ways that we do quick and easy de-identification. It basically means that when you extract data, it will extract it as a 32-character string hash. So it's a way that you can hide it, and that hash is, I believe, seeded by the project number that you supply to RDMP, which means it differs from project to project. So it allows it to be de-identified in such a way that people from different projects with different de-identified data sets can't link it back together, which is obviously one of our keys. We use it for things like lab number in our lab system, so that we don't give the same lab number out to multiple research groups. If I'm honest, I'm not a big fan of hashes. I don't think it's a nice way of doing it, but it's a quick and easy way to do it, and it fits the need. Heading forward, we would, maybe not from an RDMP perspective, but from an internal perspective, might be a way that we would rather do that, but the hash works fine, and we do continue to use that. The last thing I'm going to mention here is this category drop down. And in the category drop down, we have a series of different categories here. And the key thing here is this is all about extraction. So if you consider core to be catalog items that you wish to give to everyone, so if you think for my catalog, if I'm extracting, in this case, prescribing, everyone that comes to us and asks for prescribing is definitely going to want some form of CHI or identifier, person identifier. They're also going to want some form of drug and some form of date, for example. So those might be your core columns. If you can ever see an instance where you wouldn't want to give out any of those columns, you wouldn't set them to core. These other options, what it does, basically what happens is when you set up an extraction, it automatically takes all the core columns and adds them to that extraction. You then have the option to select these other columns individually from these other categories. So we've got supplemental, specialist approval required, internal, deprecated, and project specific. Some of them act in slightly different ways. Things like project specific can only be extracted if it's tied to an individual project. What that means is you can't accidentally take data from project 9 and pull it out for project 25. Obviously, you don't want to be doing that, and RDMP helps us to prevent that from happening. Stuff like specialist approval required, the way we use it is for things like free text data where there's a risk of there being some identifiers in there. And within HEC, what we do is we go back to local Caldecott for that and get a Caldecott approval to say, look, we might inadvertently release some identifiable data. That's not the plan. That's not what the research is for. It's because they want to do natural language processing or whatever. Is this approved? And once we get the approval, we then know. But we know it's the key thing is we know it's not automatically pushed into the extraction. So the risk of us accidentally releasing the column is removed completely. So that's the catalog item. And as I say, this is a sort of a set it up once type thing. And once you've got this configured, all the users then it configures once per instance, not per user. So everyone that connects to that same database will have the same setting, and then you can have these kind of nice kind of pre-canned catalog extraction set up. If I go back to this left pane, you'll see that each of these, I don't know how clear this is coming through to people, but each of these catalog items has a little green box on it, which has a letter E in it. The E is for extractable, and you can see some of them are red. And what that's doing is indicating the different categories. So I think red is an internal field, for example. I think that's the case. So if I go in here, if I expand this one, you can see that where Kai has the green arrow, this one has a sort of a browny red arrow and a little eye above it. And again, that's indicating, if I double click it, you can see it's internal. So what that means is this is a column we never plan to give out to anyone. It just sits in the database doing whatever it's supposed to do, but no researcher is ever going to get sight of this via RDMP. That's kind of the concept of a catalog. So hopefully you can sort of see that coming together. There's also, we can set up graphs which are about kind of data quality, etc. It's been a while since I've looked at these. I think this is a configuration screen I'm not going to dwell on at the moment, but this is how we can configure the graph. And then we can run that, and I have no idea how long it's going to take to run on my laptop. I think I'm running an instance with something like 1 million records in each table. I'll let that run, and we'll maybe come back to it later. And again, you can see that these things are kind of grouped together. We can also do things like, sorry, I should mention that the right-click context menu is one of the, quite possibly the most important thing in RDMP. So all I'm doing here is right-clicking on the catalog, and what that gives me a whole bunch of different options. Everything from deleting it, removing it, to some tree options, which is about kind of pinning it. So if I can pin it at the top, you see it gets rid of all the other catalogs. I've now only got prescribing available to me. And indeed, you can view the SQL that is generating behind the scenes. If I edit the catalog, you can see we've got a little bit of metadata in here. And this is the catalog level, the top level metadata. I probably should have said earlier, in fact, if I click on, if I wait till the donut, there we go. So here you can see the graph that RDMP is built behind the scenes. I probably didn't pick a very good one because I realized after executing it, we're looking at approved names, so generic drug names over time. So there's perhaps a little bit too much information in this graph, but hopefully you can get a bit of an idea of what's going on without trying to tie down what on earth these lines actually mean. So you could do records over time, which can obviously allow you to quickly and easily see if there's holes in your data set and things like that. Yes, I shouldn't pick approved name over time, never mind. And indeed, I think you can set these things to come out in metadata as well. Yes, which is what I was going to say. So the catalog item level, the top layer, if you double click on the top layer, you get a similar box to the one you just saw, but this is the catalog item, the column level. And you can see we can put in here a bit of metadata about the column. And there's a number of additional fields, which in this instance aren't filled in, looking at things that you might, stuff like periodicity and maybe limitations or comments based upon what you want, what you think the data user might want to know. And when you run an extraction, this stuff's packaged together into a Word document that then gets shipped with the data file as well. Again, that's a kind of pre-can at once, and it will continue to come out as you run extractions. Where was I heading? I've lost my flow. Okay, so that's catalogs, and as I say, that's the way that we kind of think about what's stored in our database, and hopefully you can start to see how piecing these things together help us to do more powerful things. If I move on to cohort building, that's probably it's the next thing in the ribbon, so it's a nice kind of natural flow.
Is there any question until now, or anything that's not clear about the catalogs and what the purpose is within RDMP?
I have a question, but it's more because I've been playing whilst you've been talking. So I was curious to what happens if I import a table into the catalogue. So I have a more specific question. Because when I've imported it, where you've got the nice little names underneath your catalogue items, mine just say A.0 or B.0, but when I click on them, it's got the name of the field. So have I done something really stupid? Should I wait until you tell us how to do that properly and stop playing?
That's quite interesting. What should happen, so I'm presuming that what you've effectively done from the catalogue window is you've created a new catalogue, either using new button or you can right click or whatever else, from a file, and you've pointed that out. I don't have a file to hand, so that's not going to work well for me.
I've done it from an existing database table, but yeah.
If you do it from existing database table, I think it should default to using the column names in the database as the catalog item name. And in fact, what I can probably kind of demonstrate that a little bit. Let's look at something slightly different.
So Chris, if I may, Katie, maybe you just need to refresh it or something, because I can see as a catalog items all the proper names like address lines, currency and all.
Oh, okay.
So if that's the case, certainly you right click a catalog and you can refresh object, and that will force RDMP to read it back in from the database. What I can do, just a little bit of a, not quite what I was going to do, but I mentioned that these catalog items are like abstract concepts of columns. What that means is we can actually reuse columns in multiple different ways. So we can have different things. Let's look at demography. It probably makes a little bit more sense. So demography has a current postcode in it, which, as you can see, is brown, which means it's specialist approval. We don't release postcodes because we define it to be a little bit too identifiable. What we can do, however, is we can create maybe postcode districts, so that the first few characters. So if I right-click the catalog items, I can add a new catalog item. The reason I'm doing this is it sort of replicates what I think we're heading towards in terms of naming the items. So you see here it's saying which catalog item do you want the new column to be based upon, and it gives me a big list. So I can look for demography. And type it properly would help. We can find current postcode in here, and we'll just base it on that. So what this is going to do, well, in this case, it prompts me for the name of the catalog item, but you can see it wants to name it based upon what the column in the database is actually called, which I would hope is what happens. It should be what happens anyway. I'm going to change this to it. And then what it will do is it will give me the window that we've seen. Well, in a moment, it gives me this expansion here. You can see there's only one element in here where we've been used to seeing two, and that's because the catalog item has been created, but it's not currently extractable. So I can right-click on that and make it extractable, which gives me this window that we've seen before, and also the little green arrow box here. And in this point, what we could do is we can use a bit of SQL or have some sort of pre-canned function or whatever. I don't know, let's say that we're going to take the left foremost elements of this. Give it an alias. You see the little alias box filling in as I type as. And we're going to say that this is a supplemental field. And we're going to save that, and that's now available as a supplemental field. That's now available to be added to our extractions. So you can see that we're reusing the same element of data, but we can do a little bit of SQL on it. We can have pre-canned functions or whatever that somehow change that, and that's now reproducible, repeatable every time. We can now select postcode district in any of our queries, whether that be cohort building or extraction based. Katie.
So the example that you've just done, thank you for that. If you wanted, and I'm sorry, I'm going off topic and I realise this is probably, but this is what's going to happen. So obviously you've just shortened the postcode, but sometimes you'd want to give SIMD instead. Do you do that there, or do you do that somewhere else?
So there's a few options. There's a few options there. What you can do, it depends how you want to do it. So as an example, we in our mature instance, we have a SIMD data set which goes into all of the basically deciles for all of the domains. So, you know, the crime and the employment, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So we do that as a completely separate data set, but we also have a demography data set that does an approximate kind of, well, gender and a dilution of date of birth and SIMDs in there as well. Okay. What we've done in that instance is we wrote it as a view in the database and then imported that view as the catalog. And that's probably the simplest way to do it, because the interaction then is just that kind of single table, if you like, or view in that case. What you can also do in RDMP, though, is you can join in different database tables. So you can create a join behind the scenes that joins your demography table to your SIMD table based on postcode. And then you can import the SIMD decile or whatever it is that you want to pull, the rank, into your demography catalog, and it can be pulled from two different source tables. We'll cover that, I think, a bit more in a future session, but the answer is yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that was interesting, because also, you know, exploring advanced concept, we'll have a look at a lot of the stuff. But for example, let's say that your SIMD comes from a web service, then you can have, for example, an extraction, a component during the extraction that instead of joining with a database, maybe it pings a web API, a remote API that gives you the CMD. That's another thing that can be done. Clearly needs a bit of development. Or for example, you can use the RDMP data loading to populate your CMD table from a web service. So there are many ways to go about what you said. Clearly having a local database is the simplest, as Chris was saying. But yeah,
you've scared me off with that one as well, Leandro. But the flexibility, I think the key thing, as Leandro was pointing out, is that the flexibility is there to do many different things. As Leandro says, that can be implemented at the point of extraction rather than earlier on, or whatever. There's lots of flexibility, lots of pretty cool stuff that we can do. And again, the key thing to note, certainly for a lot of people on the call, is that this is the sort of stuff we're talking about here is stuff that you would do in the setup portion, the setup of the catalog. It's stuff that's reusable. It's not necessarily things that you'll get too involved in. When we reach the later parts of RDMP, we start talking about setting up extractions. Then you'll be selecting things that are already set up rather than doing the initial setup. So yeah, there's lots of kind of cool ways it can work. Unfortunately, the pre-canned data is all simple single table stuff, but I could talk a little bit more about multi-table when we get to the mature instance.
No, that's absolutely fine. So just so that people don't panic on the line, so probably AD, Arta, and me, we're the ones probably doing the setup, and what we've done is we've installed it on one of our servers just at the moment. So we've just been playing with a GP database, which is why I was just asking that question. But for Vicky, Chris, Barry, Bernard, I've missed someone off. Jarek, you're on the other list. You're with me and Arta. You guys would be you might not even get to the extraction side, but you would be maybe supporting people that were looking at that extraction side. But what I would say to Chris is just think about, you could have a conf in here and you could be able to then just do your extracts out of here for that project.
I think one of the things that we use it for, or that I use it for within my team, so I guess there's a little bit of background. I've worked within HIC for many years, and all this masses of domain knowledge all rests in my head. One of the things that we've used it for is gathering the metadata and allowing more junior members of my team to set up extractions quickly and easily without necessarily having to have a huge amount of domain knowledge. It's something that's quite hard to represent and showing showing the systems, but it does allow people to get up and running pretty quickly as well, to be productive, but also to have a kind of a library, if you like, of knowledge at their fingertips as well. So, if it's a researcher that comes along and says, "Oh, I'm looking at this extraction you've given me," you can see the metadata that they're given just by opening it up and say, "Oh, there's this patient triage score. What does that mean?" You can double click it and read the description that's not here in the pre-canned version. But hey, the idea is there. And indeed, you'll know that they have that piece of metadata as well, because it comes out when the extractions run. But also the other thing, I guess, is that again, looking at these columns that have these little green E's being our core extraction, we know that the researcher is going to get these, but what we know for sure is they're not going to get the ones that they're not set to extract. So stuff like forename and surname, there's no way we can accidentally leave that in a manual query or whatever and hand it out by accident, because RDMP simply doesn't allow it to be extracted. It's not set up to be extracted. Anyway, so yeah, that's lots of stuff about catalogs anyway. I'm going to move on to Cohort Builder. Cohort Builder, again, where everything in RDMP is viewed through. I'm going to keep calling it the left pane. You can actually move these around, so I can make it the right pane if I like by doing that. But I like to keep it on the left, so I'm going to keep it on the left. We're going to talk about this left pane. It splits into a couple of different options here. We've got what we call, I'm going to talk about free configurations first, which basically means a configuration that isn't attached to any project. And then there's project associated, and the idea here is that you can have various different projects with various different things higher off of it. You'll see the little icon changes very slightly in these example cohort 2 and example cohort 3. One's slightly more blue than the other. That means it's frozen. If I double click that, you get this blue line across the top that says it's read only because the configuration is frozen. The idea here is you've built a configuration, you've used the configuration. This is now part of your audit trail. It now shows you things that have happened in the past. You can't go in and accidentally change it and mess it up in some way. This one is not blue. This is not frozen. I don't get the line. I can interact with this one. You can right click and you can clone. So you can make a copy of this example cohort if you want to reuse it in future. But the idea is that you might set it up today for a project. The person might come back to you in a year's time and say, I would like to rerun my whole project, newly built cohort. This time I also want to include people with a different condition. You can clone it and add that in and then kind of move forward using the original one as a basis. Or indeed, you can just completely rerun it and submit the newer version of the cohort based upon new data flowing into your database over the kind of time period. When you create a new cohort, actually, I'll do that in a later session. I'll talk about the one that's pre-canned because it's given us some stuff I can see. So what you can see here is on this right pane now, we've got a few different things. There's quite a lot of information here. I appreciate it, but once you start to break it down, I don't think it's that bad. RDMP uses set theory to build cohorts. If you're not familiar with set theory, it's pretty simple. There's 3 things you need to learn, I guess. You need to learn about accept, intersect, and union. And when I say learn, really all you need to do is look at this tiny little icon here, and that kind of tells you what's going on. I don't know how clear it's coming through, but hopefully you can see this little icon here. I can't think of a way to zoom it in. So what that's telling you is the red component is the bit it's selecting. So
when we get to the cohort builder, which will probably be in the near future, we're going to set the slides with set theory explained with nice colored diagrams, so shouldn't be too hard.
So basically what's happening here is we're building up these different queries using these different containers, and inside these containers we import catalogs, representations of catalogs. So we've got prescribing here, you see on the right I've got prescribing catalog, demography, admissions, and prescribing again for some reason in this example. And within that we can have different queries added in. So we can have an and, we can change that to an or if we want, but it's an and, just like a SQL and in this case. And then we've got BNF section 2. So if I double click on that, you can see we've got a straight bit of SQL that's looking at formatted BNF like 2 wildcard. Relatively straightforward SQL interaction stuff there. Appreciating that some people might not be too familiar with SQL, RDMP also allows catalog-based filters. So these things are filters that are basically added in. They might be parameterized. They can be reused in future. They can be imported for different things. So in this case, in the sample data set, we've got a couple. Let's take prescribing within the last X years. When I select that, what happens is I get a similar looking window, but you see we've got this middle section, not just the SQL, and it says value to do. And I can put in a number here, which is the number of years different that we want for this particular. So if I put 15, last 15 years, actually I might need 25. I have a feeling the sample data ends at about 2000. So if I go putting in 5 years, I always get no results back, which is not ideal. So let's say we're looking for prescription in the last 25 years. That will now add, and if I hit this execute button here, it runs and it gives me no one. So there is no prescriptions for BNF2 in the last 25 years. Note to self, learn what the synthetic data set looks like before creating cohorts. Let's remove that and see if we can get any numbers to appear. I'll run that whilst I'm talking through everything else. So we've got other bits here as well. We've got demography over 65, and you can see there's a filter older than at least X years. And if I double click on that, you see we've got 65 in here. Really probably should have changed the title so it looks a bit clearer. And here we go, you can see some counts coming through. So we've got, what am I missing? Well, maybe then. Well, it's probably because I double clicked at the same time.
You change the queries.
Yeah, I shouldn't edit the query whilst I'm running the. Yeah, so you can see here what we've got is at the very top we've got 7. So the cohort that I'm building consists of 7 people, and you can see the breakdown coming out of each individual bit. So, for example, prescribing, we've got 111,000 records appearing, but only 11 of them fit into the intersect between the different data sets. Similarly, we've got 50,000 over 65s, but by the time I run the accept, which is getting rid of people that have had hospital admissions, there's only 14 people left. So we've got, I guess, if I shrink these down a little bit, it's maybe a bit easier to read. I also realise that this should say people in prescribing, not people should be in it too. This will be because I've used this for a previous demo and done some editing. So if I collapse down, all I'm doing here is getting rid of the. I want to get rid of the little filters just to kind of simplify it. So we've got the filter below this that says diabetic drugs. You can see it's looking at BNF chapter 6.1. If I collapse this down, you can then see that we've got an accept, which is takes the first thing and excludes the second thing. So we've got take people over 65, but not those who have had hospital admissions. And then we've got an intersect, which is people that appear in every set. So it's take people who have a BNF2 prescription and also who are 65 who haven't had the hospital admission. That kind of makes sense. And these numbers at the top line, of course, I've edited it again. These numbers at the top lines represent that. So there's 11 people in our data set who have had a prescription of BNF2, who are over 65 and who have not had a hospital admission. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Adding catalogs in is simply a right click and add catalog into container. What we then get is the option to add in one or more catalogs, so we can add in whatever it happens to be, hospital admissions, and you'll see it adds hospital admissions into this data set. We can then add, at that point, that's just selecting everyone in our hospital admission data set. If we want to filter that down further, we can add a filter container, which gives me a little hand. And into that, we can then put in a new filter from our catalog, or we can write it from scratch. In this case, the only option in our early version, but I guess, at the administration level, you can set up many different filters in here. In the test one, we've only got one, ICD code equals. And then there's the next option here. RDP also allows us to have kind of pre-canned sets. So you can call it heart failure. We can select heart failure. Someone behind the scenes has already decided that heart failure means I-50. So that can happen beforehand, and then obviously when you're operating, you can just select it as heart failure. And that's me added in effectively people within heart failure with heart failure into that cohort builder criteria. Once we have created this configuration and we've decided that we've got the number that we want, of course, now that I've added heart failure, I'm going to get no one, so I'll take that out. See if I can get back to a point where I've got some people. Actually, it doesn't really matter. So we've got our 7 people again anyway. This is a configuration, so keep in mind if new data has been loaded behind the scenes, that number might well change next week or next month or next year, but that configuration will continue to work. What we want to do if we want to run a project is commit the cohort, so there's a little commit button at the top, and what that does is it changes it from being a configuration to being an actual list of identifiers, or list of KIs in our case. That list of KIs is then set in stone at that point in time, so we know what the cohort was for the project when we executed it, and we can reuse that in future, and it's obviously it can become associated with the project, etc. And that segues quite nicely, I think, into data export, unless someone wants to ask something on Cohort Builder. I've tired everyone out, so no questions.
Yeah, just one thing. I don't know if it clarifies or not. But the commit cohort, as Chris was saying, that freezes the list of identifiers. It doesn't freeze the data that will come out for those identifiers when you start doing the linkage. So this step here only defines the list of people. when you have that list of people in a project and you run an extraction of that project, which we're gonna see next, then at that point you do the linkage with data that you have in the system, and at that point it becomes extracted, and then you can freeze that extraction as well. So if you repeat in the future, you got the same data. It's just it's just a different concept between the list of identifiers and the data associated with identifiers. And the same goes, we'll see that in more details, the same goes with the filter. So the filters here are filters on the number of people. So for example, you want people that have never been prescribed a particular drug. Then when you do the extraction, you can have older prescription. But let's say you don't want the prescription for another drug, so you only want extracted the prescription for drug X, then at that point you will have to use another filter later down the line. So filters can exist at different stages. The core builder basically just builds a core. I think that's the name.
Yes, so that's
okay. I don't know if that clarifies or confuses things, but.
No, it's the way I would describe it is the aim of what we're trying to do here is build a list of KIs, and the outcome of this procedure is literally that, a list of KI numbers. So when we commit the cohort, what we have is a list of actual KI numbers stuck in a database table, and that is what we would call a cohort. What this configuration is not a list of KIs, it's a piece of SQL. So I brought that up in the background here. You can see I've got like people in BNF2. And you can see here people in BNF2 in the comment. So that piece of SQL is what RDMP is building from this piece of the configuration. And you can see we've got an intersect, which is tying to this intersect and so on. So this is as you probably all know, the query is exactly that. It's a query that can be run and it will produce different results depending on what's happening to the data behind the scenes. If there's more data inserted, the chances are it's going to produce a slightly different result. So configuration is effectively a piece of code that allows you to rerun and rebuild based upon whatever that thing happens to be, over 65s with diabetes, for example. And if you run that in 2 years' time, there's going to be more over 65s with diabetes, potentially, as prevalence of diabetes might be raising. If you commit the cohort today, and there's 12,000 over 65s with diabetes, then that 12,000 KIs is committed as of today. In 2 years' time, if you go back and look at that cohort, it's still 12,000 KIs. It was today, it is in 2 years' time. If you rerun the configuration, maybe it's 14,000 KIs, and you can recommit that and have two cohorts, one for 2020 and one for 2021. You get the idea. So that's the difference, I guess, between the configuration and the actual cohort. The configuration is only used for building cohorts, and you edit them and so on and so forth. The committed cohort, the list of KIs, is what we use for extraction. So on the data export side of things, everything in data export ties to a project. So you see we've got this example lung cancer project, number 123. If I expand, what I'm going to actually do, I'll mention Control F briefly. So Control F is find. Obviously there's only two projects here. Once you reach a point where you've got a screen full of projects, Control F is something that you use quite regularly. So let's look for our lung cancer project, and we can pin that now. So you see it's got rid of the other project. I'm only looking at the lung cancer. We've got a nice orange bar that tells us what's going on. And as I say, it looks perhaps doesn't make much sense in an instance where there's only two projects. But trust me, when you've got like 500 projects, it starts to make a lot more sense. The project breaks down into a number of things. We've got cohort, we've got extraction configurations, and we've got two other little elements here as well. The bottom one, project-specific catalog, simply lists any data that's specific to that project, any catalogs we've created just for that project. In this case, we don't have any. The second from bottom is a folder, and that's where it's going to put stuff when we extract it. If I double-click it, it opens a folder, probably as you would expect. And this is just opening my temp folder at the moment. There's nothing, but you can hopefully see how you might have an area on a shared drive where you all output to the same kind of place, the same thing with the data. We've then got extraction configurations in cohort. I'll expand cohort briefly and talk about that. We've got the queries, cohort builder queries. That's this thing on the right, and we can associate that with a project. This one isn't associated. Actually, can I do that? I should be able to do that somehow. I can't remember how to do that. We'll do that when we cover cohort building in more detail. But you can associate the configuration, the query with the project, which then means you can go back and recall it quite easily. And then you've got the saved cohorts, which are the actual Chi lists. So this thing here, can I actually? I think I can do that, yeah. So again, this is synthetic data. So you can see it here that what we've got is, can do that actually. We've got a list of Chi's. Does it let me do that? I can't remember. It doesn't. This doesn't give me a count. Okay. We've got a large list of the Chi's that make up the cohort. This basic instance, instance of RDMP, what it does is it does all the linkage by Chi, and it uses this thing called release ID as the de-identified component for that person. So what happens is you've got Chi in your database. When you give it to your researcher, you get this instead of that. That's what's going on there. And you can change what that is. It's just in the pre-canned version, it just does a simple hash of that. But you can hopefully see how that works. And again, that's hashed based upon this project number 123. So if I have the same cohort in multiple projects, it would produce a different release ID, so they're not cross-linkable. But again, you can also see this is version 1, but we can also have multiple versions. We might have a 2020 version, a 2021 version. It might be growing and so on. We then have extraction configurations. So these are about, not about the cohort building, but about the data that we actually want to come out for our researchers. We've got frozen ones, which are ones that have been released. We don't want to touch them. They're the history. But we can go in and we can see in the past, there was a 2017 refresh, and it contained biochemistry and hospital admissions and prescribing. And we can see there's a 2018 refresh, which is old, but hey, which is the one that we're currently working on, obviously, because we're right up to date. And what we've got are these various different catalogs in here. I can add data sets, which gives me the ones that are not already in there. So these two, the conditions and operations catalogs, are not already in my list. But if I, for example, remove biochemistry from the extraction, I can, just to give it a bit better concept, we can say, oh, let's add biochemistry to our extraction, and then it will add it in. Each of these, much in the same way as we saw in Cohort Builder, we can right-click and we can add a filter from the catalog. So we can say, we want creatinine. So the researchers only asked for creatinine tests. They haven't asked for anything else. We can add that in, and we see test code like CRE in this case is now added in. So what's going to happen there is when we run the extraction, we're only going to get creatinine tests out of the database. You can see here, this line here is a cohort. You see the little diagram looks like a little kind of person's head, and you can see it's version 1 of the cohort. And at that point, that's how we can kind of select the cohort for that extraction. So if there were other cohorts, we could choose cohort, but in this case, there's only one. So, but you can see how you can change that to your next cohort if you regenerate and so on. If we double click the actual extraction configuration, the little cog, we get this little execution window opening up. What we've got is each of these data sets that we've got listed down here can now be selected to be extracted. And at the top, we've got an extraction pipeline. So in the test example, all we've got is a CSV pipeline. But if I hit the checks button, it'll run off and basically check that you've got permission to run out of the database and that everything's in place and it's ready to go. And it gives you a million messages that you'll probably never want to read. And then you can execute it, and it will now run off into the database using the cohort that we've created, looking at the data sets, for example, our biochemistry with our creatinine filter on it. And it's now going off and writing a CSV file based on that. So what we can, of course, because I'm pushing it into my temp folder, I'm never going to be able to find it, but let's have a go. Why is it not opening?
Well, just sort by date, and you'll find them.
Oh no, it's fine. It's opening up on my other monitor. It's everything's happening over there. I'm looking over here. Yeah, I think there should be a folder called extractions. Yeah, there we go. So what it's done is it's output to this extractions folder, and you can see the folders here are the names of the catalogs that we've selected for extraction. We're concentrating on biochemistry, so I'm going to stick with that. You can see that we've got 3 things coming out. We've got lookups, which are pre-configured. There's nothing in here, but you can configure lookups. So you can say, every time I extract biochemistry, I want this lookup to come with it. Or you can also have like different kind of associated documents that might talk about data quality or whatever. We've got a CSV file, which I'll stop looking and let it open on my other monitor and not see it. No, there we go. So you can see here, this is the actual data that's come out. So the key thing you can see is release ID, not KI number, which is kind of what we expect, and also anything that's got CRE in the test code, because that was our filter, was filtering on creatinine. And that's the kind of flat file that we can pull out and then supply to our researcher. De-identified, restricted to creatinine, just as we asked. We also have a Word document, which is a metadata document. And in that, what we've got is 2 kind of separate bits. We've got metadata about the file on page 1. So it tells you what the file's called, how many members of your cohort were in it, sorry, how big your cohort was and how many members of that cohort were in the file, how many lines are in your data set, so that the researcher can do a very quick check to ensure everything's going fine. There's an MD5, which is like a checksum calculation you can run on a Windows file to make, or a computer file, to make sure that it matches the correct thing. File size and the data was extracted and things like that. And then we've got the kind of catalog level metadata. So this is telling us that the catalog is called biochemistry, and this is what our metadata and RDMP tells us. And then we've got in the individual columns, so sample, date, type, test code, whatever. We've got a little bit a description for each column, which of course you can fill in once and it comes out every time. And then there's other things like the data type in the database and things like that, which could be useful for the researcher when they're trying to import this flat file into the package that they're using. And if I scroll right down to the bottom, we can also see the filters comes out as well with the description we put on it. So we've got a filter in this case for creatinine. We've actually go right down to the detail with the SQL, perhaps not something that the researcher needs to see, but it's in there and it allows us to do better kind of validation in future if need be, and indeed the description of what we've applied. So hopefully you can see how those things can be useful to the researcher. I think there's also an option through, if you have a data quality engine set up, I think there's a way you can stick in little graphs and things at the top, but we haven't quite got as far as using some of those features ourselves yet. So that's in a hopefully relatively brief nutshell, that's an entire project life cycle in RDMP.
Well, there is so just a couple of things, and then we'll open up for questions. So the reason behind the fact that individual data sets are selectable is just that allows to run extraction at different times. In the case, for example, of biochemistry or prescribing for us, where you got dozens of millions of rows, a single extraction can take a very long time. So you can do an individual one day, the next one another day. Clearly, if your database is performing and you don't have millions of rows, you tend to run everything at the same time. And I mean, maybe we can go to the last bit in the last 5 minutes, which is the actual release, because we do that through RDMP as well. But before we go there, is there any questions or anything else you want to see here while we got RDMP open? Keep in mind that you're muted, just in case you want to speak.
No, I'm all good.
Yeah, just demonstrating what Leandro's saying. I've selected prescribing, and I can rerun that, and it's only pulled out prescribing. I guess the instance, as Leandro says, you might have something that takes quite a long time to extract. RDMP is only as quick as your database server is, so if you've got, you know, there's no miracle work going on, unfortunately, there. And if you've got our database server, then some things can take a while. But perhaps you've gone through you go through validation, you've realized that actually prescribing should have a filter on it. So we're saying, no, actually, let's do what we actually want is BNF section 6. We're looking at diabetes earlier. So we can put that in. I can then rerun that, and I should have pointed out the number first. And a moment ago, before I rerun it, it said 52,000, and now it says less than 5,000. So you can see it's applied that filter, and it's extracted a smaller data set. And if I go back to the extraction folder, which I've now lost, there we go. What it's done is it's replaced that file in the prescribing data set. So, sorry, folder, extraction folder. So, oh no, I always use Notepad++, and I'm trying to use Excel because it's easier to view for everyone else. So apologies for that. But you can now see that the formatted BNF code is now chapter 6. So there's nothing in there, but they all begin with a 6. So you can see that that's done that. If you run it, I think if you run it over, it's got this extraction 3 up here. And I think there's only one in there because it's cleared out the other ones. But if I run it yesterday, I think it stores the files separately per day. So what you potentially end up with is a whole bunch of different extractions across.
No, it doesn't do that anymore.
Does it not do that anymore? Cool. Okay, that's fine then. But so what Leandro's talking about basically kind of packages up the extraction. But I guess it doesn't do that much, and pretty much just creates this then, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What it used to do is select the latest version of each of our data sets. So if we extracted 8 days running and we had 8 of them, it would throw away the old 7 and take the newest one. But yeah, as Leandro says, that's changed. Things change behind the scenes. It's good. Yeah, so what we can do is we can go to the project and we can release the project, which gives a similar looking execution window. But what this is going to do now is it's going to say, it's going to check to make sure the files exist. So for example, if you've never extracted biochemistry, it will tell you, and it won't allow you to release your project because obviously there's an expected data set that's missing. So it's telling you, you haven't done this, you need to go off and do this. So select you can have different pipelines in here as well, so it can be released in various different ways. I think we've got ones that do things like zip encrypt the data, ready for it to be sent out to someone, for example. I think we've got another one that can send it off to a little web service to try and copy it into our safe haven. So it zip encrypts it, points it to the web service can then receive it and unpack it in the safe haven. So there's various different things.
Just to add, the other thing they will do is also, if, for example, when Chris changed the prescribing to add the filter, if it didn't extract that and went straight into release, the release engine will say, hey, you changed the query, but the file you extracted was before your change. So I'm not going to allow the extraction because clearly, the file on disk is different than the definition.
That's good, actually. Yeah. So you can see here, if I run the checks on this release, you see it's all fine. It's given us a medium face because we don't have a ticketing system configured. We can configure ticketing systems. We use Jira and HIC, and it can attach to your ticketing system and say, is this ticket in a releasable state, for example, via a plugin? And if it's not, so for example, if we don't have the correct governance, it can prevent us from creating the release, but that's a bit of a tie-in with the project management system, our ticketing system that we run. As Leandro says, let's say we go back to here and we're doing validation and we think, oh no, it's not supposed to be 6, it's supposed to be 5. So we'll change it to BNF section 5. I think what Leandro's saying is if I hit the checks button, it will now fail. So what it's saying is, it says the prescribing extraction is desynchronized. So, and you see the little SQL not matching symbol in here. It's a little red and green arrow. So what that's doing is telling us that there's something wrong. And if I double click, I haven't even shown you the screen. I just realized that. If I double click this, this is how to select columns. I should have done that beforehand.
It's right click to select.
It's right click. Yeah, I just realized that.
Difference.
It's there somewhere. Yeah, so you can look at SQL and you can see the then versus now. And what it's doing is it's showing you that when it was run, it was a 6, and now it's a 5. So, but realistically, what that's telling you is that what you need to do is go back to the execution and re-extract your prescribing data. So it's saying something is wrong with this prescribing data, it needs to be re-extracted. So we can go back to here, I can rerun it, and it will extract it and it'll match. What I'm going to mention beforehand is that other screen that we touched on there, because I didn't mention that beforehand. I spoke about core, etc. Columns in the past. I think we looked at demography. So if we double click on demography, what you see here is the list of columns. So you see it says core here. This is a deprecated catalog because I've demonstrated deprecated catalogs with this instance in the past. Don't worry about that. So what we've got is core columns and specialist approval columns and supplemental columns. You see postcode district that I added earlier in the session appears here. So I can now take postcode district and I can add that into our extraction. So that now appears in the file that comes out. And that's how we pick and choose the columns that go in. When we add a catalogue, so earlier on I threw biochemistry away again. What it's done is it's selected all of the core columns, and biochemistry only has 4 columns. But if we took away if we added demography fresh, it would add it with each of these core columns already in there. It would not add the specialist approval or the deprecated columns. So you see how you go in and then select those things. I'm now going to have 2 differences. So what I would have to do is, of course, yeah, so if I rerun that again, I should get 2 warnings now because demography and prescribing are now both different. So if I rerun both of those extractions, I've got a problem with my order. Okay. I didn't set my column up properly, so I'm just going to bin it for now and cover that in the later session. But basically, when you'll appreciate there's an order to these things. So you want the order to be the same every time, so the researcher gets a file that looks the same if they run multiple projects. I didn't configure an order when I added the postcode district. So what's happening is it's clashing with another column. So RDP doesn't quite know where to put it in the extraction. Actually, that's something that we're in the process of fixing, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I can rerun this and I can re-extract 2 files. I'll just take a moment to write to the files. Actually, you can see the number of rows, etc. that have been written. So you can see the demography has given us 53,000 records. Prescribing has given us 3,000 records. And now if I go back to the release engine, I can run my checks. It's not going to fail now. It's all good. I can hit the button, and what it's going to do is package up my data ready to go to the researcher and also freeze my configuration. So that's it. It's run, and it should say at the bottom it's all done. So you see now my 2018 refresh is now in the frozen extractions. It's not, so I can no longer edit that. And if I go back to my folder, which again I've lost this. Where does it put it? There it goes. I'm not used to working in a temp folder. Ordinarily, we'd work it into a project folder, but it sticks the date on when it came out. It gives a project number. So I think that's options you can set in the pipeline. So in this case, it's doing reverse date followed by project name. And you can see here we've got 2018 refresh 3, which is what my configuration was called. We've got a contents text file, which gives you some basic kind of folder structure stuff that's going on there. So it's telling you what the directories are and what's contained within them. It tells you when it was created and all that kind of stuff. We've got globals, which are things that there's none in this case, but globals are things you can set to come out with each and every extraction you ever run. So for us, we put things like some metadata. I think like ICD code lookups, things like that. We just give them to everyone for everything, even if you haven't asked for anything with ICD codes in them. You can also put things like maybe descriptor files about, who, in our case, who HIC are and how you can contact us for support or whatever. That can all go in there. And then you've got a similar looking thing the last time with the 4 different folders. It was prescribing, I looked at, wasn't it? Which has the same kind of setup. And we've got this additional thing here, this release document, which basically pulls together all of the stuff that we've just released. So you've got a cohort name at the beginning and the number of unique individuals in your cohort. So 6,630 people were in this particular cohort, and each catalog that we've extracted, how many records are on the file, and how many of the 6,630 people appear in that catalog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there you go. That's now our complete project workflow in RDMP. Yeah.
Well, we kind of flew over all the features and just looked at the very quickly how our full project workflow works. Thanks a lot, Chris. Is there? No, I do realize. I appreciate time is off 12, and Katie just said that she has to fly on another call. Is there any other questions or anything else you want to know or see if you have the time? Cool, I guess they'll come. So in terms of going forward, I would suggest trying out the installer as which is in the little file I sent. There is a link to the installer, and over the next 2 weeks, see if you can manage to install and play around with the sample data, and use Teams to ping us messages, and we can go one-to-one or even have a quick half an hour with a selected number of people if you're all having the same problem at the same time. So at least we all go, for the next time we all have an instance of RDMP running on our machine, which is the most important bit. And we'll try and go from there. In terms of next time, is 2 weeks on Friday still a good day, or good day for everyone? I think that was what we agreed with Katie and Joanne and Alistair. But clearly we can, we can change things if we want.
I think keeping it the same time and day of the week would be great.
Makes it easier. Yeah, I'll set up the calendar appointment just now, so we'll know what's happening in 2 weeks' time.
Perfect.
And that's it. If there is no other burning questions, I'll just leave it to the Teams chat to solve any other problems.
Yeah, I guess we'll play with it a bit, and then if we've got any questions, then we will come back probably to you.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, well, thank you all very much. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Could you make sure you share this recording, please? Because I missed a bit at the start because I had sketchy connection.
No problem. As soon as we stop the meeting, it should appear in the chat where the recording is available. If it doesn't, I'll share the link.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
I think it might be worth mentioning. I think you maybe need to skip maybe 15 or so minutes in, I think, before because there was a little bit of obviously setup stuff and whatever else with regard to Teams. So
There was a bit of housekeeping, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
Cool.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
again, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.